Hello and welcome to a new series on my channel called Reappraisal, where I look at the 10 stories which were ranked in the bottom 10 of Doctor Who magazine's 50th anniversary poll of all episodes. While there is much dispute over the poll's results, such as Day of the Doctor somehow being considered the greatest episode ever, all of these stories in the bottom 10, I'd say, get a bad rap pretty uniformly in the Doctor Who community. The point of this is to work out whether their reputation is really fair. To resolve this, I'm going to take an in-depth look at all 10 stories to see if calling the worst of the worst is really accurate. According to this poll, the 10th worst episode of Doctor Who ever is The Space Museum, which is a William Hartnell story from the second season. For me, it's pretty obvious that this is a stopgap episode between The Lavish Crusade, which had so many fine actors, and the epic The Chase, which would be the exit for Ian and Barbara. Often these stopgap episodes don't really get much love in Doctor Who, especially budget-wise, and while that may be somewhat the case, I'd still argue the Space Museum is a good laugh, not to mention pretty damn interesting at times. I know a lot of people will probably be quite bemused by that, especially by the episode's detractors, but I honestly don't see what's so wrong with it. True, the writing and tone can be a bit scattershot, but 10th worst Doctor Who episode? No way. Let's address the plot of the story first, since the most used criticism of this episode tends to be that it's allegedly boring. Episode 1 starts off really strongly. Admittedly, it's stronger than the rest of the story, but it still deserves praise. It gives us a bit of a mystery, and a clever one at that, to do with the hazards of time travel. It's a really clever way of foreshadowing events later in the story, and giving the characters something to aim for throughout the story. This is probably the first use of time travel and issues with time were a part of a Doctor Who plot, and it's a tradition that crops up every so often in the show to varying degrees of success. But it's really well handled here, and it definitely makes episode 1 an interesting and tense affair. Definitely an entertaining start. Episode 2 changes the pace and tone rather a lot as the time travel elements wind down and were released into the main chunk of the story. To concede to the detractors somewhat, it does feel like the writer didn't quite know how to continue the story following the use of his amazing initial idea, and it starts to become a bit more generic. Oppressed people, nasty empire, rebels, yada yada. However, to counter this, the writer uses great character writing for our main cast and humour to keep us entertained. This story has to have some of Doctor Who's funniest moments. It's such a shame how overlooked it is in this regard. The story in particular gives Vicky something good to do when she helps instigate the revolution, basically single-handedly. It's great character development as it's showing her becoming less needy and not as dependent than when she starts due to her awful experiences in her initial story. It's great to see a bit of a catalyst for becoming a more confident character later in the series. Admittedly, there is a bit of faffing about towards the end of the episodes, with the story not really knowing where to go and not really going anywhere, and yes, it does take away from the experience a bit. This is a very flawed episode of Doctor Who, there's no doubt about that. However, I simply don't believe it's fair to label it as one of the worst Doctor Who episodes of all time. It starts off with a really clever idea, which is pulled off brilliantly in the first episode, and it has quite a few great moments of humour and character interaction in the rest of the story. It may not be a whole lot, but it's worth merit. Considering some of the most poorly thought out, carelessly made, and downright appalling Doctor Who episodes there are out there, some of which are basically an insult to the audience and ruin the lore of Doctor Who as a whole, seem to get off the hook, while an episode like this is lambasted as one of Doctor Who's worst. I must give this one a reappraisal. A decent story, it has its problems, and it can be dull at points, but I'd encourage people to give this one another go. There are some good things to be seen here.